Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our forum series. I'm so pleased that you're all here. I want to welcome the senator, and I've got a few check-in remarks first, and then we'll get going. First of all, I'd like to thank our board members from Westside Economic Alliance that are here with us today. We've got quite a list of board members that are with us. And by the way, I'm Pam Treese. I just jumped in and I'm the Executive Director of Westside Economic Alliance. Again, welcome. And now I would like to recognize the elected officials that are with us today. And I'd also like to thank our elected officials for all the work that you do and for representing us. It's much appreciated. Thank you. So the format for the forum this morning is going to be pretty simple. We are going to hear from IBW 48 through Joe Esmond, and then we are going to go to Senator Merkley, and when he'll have a few minutes to speak, and then it's going to be mostly questions and answers from you all. So please put your questions into the Q&A. It's easier if they're in the Q&A, I can follow through and I'll be fielding those questions for the senator. So IBW is our sponsor for the Breakfast Forum series, for the Breakfast Forum this morning, but Legacy Health is our sponsor for the entire series. And I have a message from Legacy that I would like to read. Legacy Health thanks Senator Merkley for his efforts to protect Oregonians during the pandemic by fighting for economic relief, securing PPE and testing supplies, and ensuring that every Oregonian has access to the vaccine. Legacy has been on the front lines of the pandemic, caring for COVID-19 patients in their hospitals and helping vaccinate our community. As vaccines become more readily available in our communities, the demand at mass vaccination sites like the All for Oregon Mass Vaccination Clinic at the Oregon Convention Center has waned a bit. The OCC Mass Vaccination Site will offer first doses or the first primary shot through May 27th. In June, the Oregon Convention Center will offer second doses only. The All for Oregon site will officially close on Saturday, June 19th. Until then, the 4 health systems at the Oregon Convention Center will continue to offer both scheduled appointments and walk-ins. All for Oregon strongly encourages everyone who hasn't been vaccinated yet to take advantage of the convenient, efficient OCC experience. Please encourage your employees, your coworkers, your friends, and your loved ones to get a vaccine. And please continue to wear your masks when appropriate, practice physical distancing when appropriate, and limit indoor gatherings. Together, we can stop the spread of COVID-19. A big shout out to all of our health workers from me and from Westside Economic Alliance for all the work that you've done to get us to the point we are. So with that, I would like to turn I'd say the microphone, but I guess it's your computer audio or whatever you're using, over to Joe Esmond for a few words about IBW 48, our sponsor for today. Joe, you need to unmute yourself, please.
There you go. Okay. Good morning, Joe Esmond. A proud 30-year member of the IBW. We're about 105 years old in the Portland metro area with in Southwest Washington, 5,300 members. We work in residential, commercial, and schools. I want to thank, we are pro-business and pro-jobs. Some of the work we have done in Washington County or with our friends at Genentech, Intel, Kaiser, PGE, and the Port of Portland. We have about 800 and some apprentices. We actively reach out to women and minorities to join us. And our training center is almost 100% funded by ourselves and our contractors. and we were very active in federal, state, and local issues. And we have 700 members in Washington County. That's it.
So Joe, would you like to introduce the senator?
Sure. I'd like to introduce, I've known Jeff since 2008 during the election cycle, and he is known here and known across the country as being a good friend of working people of all stripes and a champion of the environment. He's originally from Myrtle, Oregon, son of a millwright. Attended Princeton University and Stanford. He now serves on the appropriations, the budget, environmental and public projects, and foreign relations. He's been a good friend of ours and of all people, and we're very proud to. I'm very proud to introduce Jeff to all of you. Thank you. That's it.
Joe, thank you very much, and Pam, thank you. You can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, good. It's always good to check so you don't have to a minute in tell me I forgot to unmute or who knows what. So much is going on. We're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of George Floyd's murder. It'll be May 25th, so just about a week from now, and it's been a year in which the country has been having a long overdue reckoning with our history of racial injustice and systemic discrimination. I've been thinking about this a lot as we engage in trying to provide resources for every family in America to thrive, which I'll address in a moment, but also in the context of specific bills. Cory Booker, Senator from New Jersey, leading the effort on the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, which I've been quite involved in, especially in the provisions for a national database related to police misconduct to try to make sure that individuals who abuse civil rights in one context aren't fired or resign and then go down the street and get hired again to repeat the same kind of abuses again. Also, I was pondering in the course of this year the challenges we face with mass incarceration and thinking about a documentary I saw some years ago called The 13th, about the 13th Amendment. And that documentary was about how when the Civil War ended and the 13th Amendment was passed, it had an exception in it to ending slavery, which was that you could continue slavery as long as someone was convicted of a crime. And that led immediately, and I'm talking within days and weeks of many states enacting a whole series of laws that essentially made it a crime to be black. They included things like talking too loud, or not yielding a sidewalk, or being unemployed, or taking a new job without the permission of your existing employer. These things collectively became known later as the Black Codes, and they threw people back into slavery. And it included throwing children back into slavery and women back into slavery, not just men, though mostly men. And the state then would rent out the folks they were re-enslaving, and it became a major source of funding to states in the South. It was really the beginnings of mass incarceration. So as I was pondering that, I thought, that clause in the 13th Amendment, that exception that allows slavery to continue under the use of the Black Codes, really needs to be removed from the 13th. So I looked up who had sponsored modifying the 13th Amendment and discovered nobody had ever proposed that. And so it is something I'm proposing, and it's something I'm proposing for the 20-some states that have that clause as well. And Oregon is one of those states, and Oregon is considering right now eliminating it from our constitution, just as Utah has done, and Nebraska has done, and Colorado has done. So red and blue states, if you will. And it might be something that the Westside Economic Forum might want to take a look at and see if they'd like to support the state making that change. It is part of our constitution, so it would have to go out to referred out to voters. Of course, a massive part of our occupation right now is pondering how we continue the recovery from this year of COVID. We've had we've had 4 major acts. The most recent, the CARES Act and the American Recovery Plan are the 2 that get the most attention. And the American Recovery Plan had so much in it. That's the most recent bill that had housing and health care and child care and massive and continuous ongoing support for our small business programs. Included food, it included just kind of every aspect you can think of, including state and local government help, which we wanted to have local government receive checks directly rather than through the state, so they move much more quickly. And those checks should have arrived by now. So a lot in there to digest, and it's the first of a trio of bills that were planned. One, the recovery plan, a second, the jobs plan, which is the infrastructure bill, and then the family plan. And the family plan, the idea is to do some additional work on things like child care and paid leave. The child tax credit, the fundable tax credit that we had in the recovery plan under ARP, so it is law now, is estimated to take half of the children in America who are in poverty out of poverty. It's one of the most profound impacts of any legislation since the New Deal following the Great Depression. So that will be studied and considered, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of debate over whether to extend that type of provision into the future. I think you're all familiar with all the various small business efforts that included the EIDL, economic injury disaster loans convertible into grants, PPP, and then we threw in the restaurant plan and the venues plan, trying to get help where it was needed most. It's discouraging to see how many businesses have not made it even with that additional help. And I think our communities are much stronger with robust success of small businesses. Another business piece that's under consideration is really trying to strengthen America's semiconductor industry. It has been a sense that dependence on China for chips is not a good thing. We have a chip shortage. America does a lot of the R&D. We ought to be leading the world in producing chips, not being dependent on importation of chips from abroad. And now this infrastructure plan that's coming up is under negotiation, trying to get a bipartisan agreement. Part of the dispute is over the amount of money to be spent. Part of it is over what qualifies as infrastructure. You have the traditional jetties and bridges and roads, but you also have a lot of support for electric transmission lines to service a changing energy economy. A lot of support for deploying more renewable energy. A lot of support for water systems, and certainly for rural broadband. A lot of support to view housing as part of infrastructure, critical infrastructure. We all see kind of the impact of insufficient affordable housing in our state and in our cities, as we see so many people living homeless on the streets. I'm continuously struck by the tents in Portland, how the first place I ever was where I saw people essentially setting up the equivalent of tents on the sidewalks was in Calcutta when I was a State Department intern in India. And I never expected to see the equivalent of that in the United States, and yet here we are. So I'm pushing for a very, very robust infrastructure bill. It's not clear if we will get there with a bipartisan agreement or if we'll get there through reconciliation, or even whether we'll get there at all. But I feel like we really, really, really need to get there. And let me turn to another point that I'm quite involved in, and that is in wildfire prevention through changing how we manage our forests. We've been spending a whole lot of money fighting fires and not very much money thinning the forests and making them more resilient to fires on the front end. One of the changes I made in my responsibilities here was on the Appropriations or Spending Committee, moving to head up the Interior Subcommittee. because of the fires of last September. So we have this enormous impact on Oregon of a longer, hotter fire season, and of course, towns being burnt to the ground. To travel 600 miles as I did in September and never get out of the smoke, and to witness the towns that were completely incinerated was just profoundly disturbing. And I'm going to use this position as the chair of the Interior Subcommittee to get as much support for work in the forest in advance. And that really involves thinning and mowing and prescribed burns. And I think our communities have become more and more willing to have prescribed burns, realizing the potential consequences. We don't really focusing on the areas between the urban and the forest interface. I saw how Sisters was really saved by that type of preventive work when the Millie fire was bearing down on Sisters a few years ago, and saw what happened when you don't have that kind of work in some of the situations we saw last year. So that's the shift on the Interior Committee. I have a number of bills that have been introduced to really highlight the smoke damage as well as fire damage. And so that's a whole new area. We don't have an emergency designed for smoke damage. I've been able to get funds individually for things like the impact on wine grapes or the impact on some of our other crops, but we have to think more systematically about preparing and responding to smoke. And so I've set up 4 bills on that. I'm preparing a major bill on housing to try to really help drive that conversation about housing be part of the key infrastructure that we consider in the infrastructure bill, or to pass my bill independently, and water infrastructure, because clean water supply and wastewater treatment are the most common infrastructure issue to be raised as I hold my town halls in each county each year. And beforehand, I meet with the county commissioners and local electeds, and almost always there are one or more towns that are just desperate to address a critical clean water supply or wastewater treatment. On the big projects, I designed the WIFIA program, first to get it authorized and then get it funded. But on smaller towns, you need a lot more grant. You need a lot more than just the current small water revolving loan fund that we have nationally. We need a lot more grant support, and that needs to be part of this infrastructure effort. So I think I'm just going to stop there so that we can dedicate this time to questions and thoughts that you all have. So Pam, let me kick it back to you.
Great. Thank you. And thank you for all the work you're doing. It's much appreciated. I'm going to throw you the first question, and it's a softball. So it's your life must be different in this new administration. And I'd like you to tell us a little bit about what's going on and how it is different.
Well, Pam, thank you. Of course, one of the big differences is here in the Senate is Democrats are in the majority thanks to Georgia. But it's a very, very slim majority, but it does change your rhythm of life as to whether you're in the majority or not, especially in terms of chairing committees. Also affecting my life is that I took on a chairmanship of an environmental subcommittee that deals with toxics in the environment and with the issue of plastics, and plastics are becoming a much bigger issue. And then in terms of the administration, we have administration that is their style is so massively different. They're looking for science-based, rational policies. How do we work together? Not how we drive communities apart in America, which the 4 years under Trump were so much about the tensions, exacerbating the tensions based on region and race, as opposed to trying to bring us together. So that's enormously welcome. And I just feel that for every project I'm working on, I have partners in the administration. Another key thing for me right now, Pam, is that I'm leading a couple efforts that are kind of really important, but very difficult in a 50-50 Senate. One is the Equality Act, which I wrote in 2015. I was asked to take on leadership of LGBTQ non-discrimination by Senator Ted Kennedy when he was ill back in 2009. I got the Non-Discrimination in Employment and Employment Non-Discrimination Act passed through the Senate a few years after that. And then when the House didn't act, worked with groups, civil rights groups, to craft the Equality Act. Well, I have 49 sponsors, but not 50. And I don't have 60, which I didn't have 60 when I went to the floor with the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, but got them. I'm working hard to get more than 50 sponsors before we go to the floor. And hopefully we'll get the 60 votes once again. We ended up getting a 2-to-1 vote to end discrimination in employment. So it can be done, and it's way over time when half the states in the country still allow discrimination in all kinds of aspects of public accommodations, housing, jury duty, financial contracts, and as well as employment. Also, another bill that I have 49 sponsors but not 50 is S1. It's named S1 because it is considered by the caucus the most important bill, and it takes on gerrymandering and voter suppression, excuse me, and dark money. So if you were to describe it in an elevator, you would say it stops billionaires from buying elections and defends the freedom and right of every American to be able to access the ballot. And we're in the midst of over a dozen states have just passed laws, adopted laws that are targeted at specific communities to keep them from voting. Another dozen states are close to doing so. And we never expected to see this after 1965, but it all accentuates how important it is to have basic national standards for election protection on the role of money, on the role of gerrymandering or stopping gerrymandering, on the role of defending access to the ballot. And Oregon's been a leader in this because the main thrust of the effort to target communities, prevent them from voting, is to force them to vote largely on election day, where it's very easy to manipulate people's access to the ballot by reducing the number of precincts in areas that you don't want to vote, by putting them in places that don't have parking, by understaffing them so they have long lines, or putting in machines that take longer to work with, and also by putting out misinformation about when the election was, and misinformation about where the precinct voting location is, including moving it from one cycle to the next. So these are long established strategies that, in my mind, are the effort to cheat people out of their right, to steal their right to vote. So this bill that I'm the chief sponsor of, I think, is incredibly important to the vision of our country as a nation that believes in every individual having a significant role in being able to help chart the path of where we go as a nation. So having these two bills leads me to a third thing that I'm immersed in, which is basically trying to stop there from being a veto over policy bills. There is no veto over, and I'll put it in partisan terms, there's no Democratic veto or Republican effort to stack the Supreme Court. There's no Democratic veto over tax cuts that go primarily to the richest Americans. There should be no Republican veto over policies on housing, healthcare, education, living wage jobs, taking on climate change, or establishing equality of opportunity for every American. So back in 2012, I introduced one way to give due weight to the minority, but not allow paralysis. That was the talking filibuster. Every Democrat in the Senate today who was here in 2012 voted for that bill, minus one person who was absent. And so on these three issues, I'm living every day essentially in this world of 49 votes and maybe 50, but needing 60. So living the dysfunction of the Senate and trying to cure that dysfunction.
Thank you so much. And that leads your discussion around S1 leads to one of the questions in our Q&A. Comes from Jerry Mildner at PSU, and he asks, absent the passage, would you favor Oregon adopting an independent commission to draw U.S. House lines?
So I've really been focused on doing it nationally because there's a real dilemma about state by state. And it's kind of the sort of thing you might read about in a textbook, but it's difficult to deal with in reality. And that is, let's say states that lean Democratic go to independent commissions. That is certainly the right thing to do for state offices. But is it the right thing to do for federal House members? And the reason I ask that is when only one party does this, you actually increase the damage to equal representation in the House of Representatives. So definitely, Oregon should go to such a commission for state redistricting. But as to whether they should do it on their congressional districts, that's an ethical dilemma, because improving equal representation at the state action increases discrimination or bias at the federal level. And to give you a sense of this, the Republican conversation has been that they currently, and really this is a political scientist looking at this, say right now it accounts for about a 15-vote disparity in terms of Republican seats over Democratic seats. And Republicans here are talking about using the coming improved tactics in gerrymandering to produce a 25-seat bias in the House of Representatives. So if you believe in equal representation around the country, that is a real dilemma.
Thank you. The next question is from J.C. Venata at TriNet, and he asks, is there hope for a bill to be passed and signed into law that would grant an expansion of voter rights in the U.S.?
Well, that is the S1 bill, and there is hope for it. I'm living that hope every day. I wake up thinking about it. I go to bed thinking about it. I hold multiple conversations and meetings every day, but you have, it's not easy to get there. Mitch McConnell has brought his caucus together and basically said no one dare support taking on gerrymandering or the blocking the state laws that increase obstacles, create barriers to voting for targeted communities. And who are those targeted communities? We're talking about Black Americans, communities of color, Native Americans, and college students. Those are the 4 communities being targeted by these state actions. But the leader of the Republicans has said this is a complete test of your loyalty to the party. And so there's no sign we'll have anyone across the aisle stand with us in defending our Constitution, defending the right to vote, which means it has to be 50 members of the Democratic caucus getting together to figure out the pathway, both to secure the 50 votes and to solve the problem of the McConnell veto, which he has promised to exercise by denying 60 votes to close debate. And this is where my point went to adopting something like the talking filibuster or former Senator Harkin's plan, where every few days you go to fewer votes needed to close debate. If you go back in time and look at Robert Byrd more than half a dozen times used the nuclear option. This is widely unknown. So this is even by people who have studied it, it's widely not understood that on at least half a dozen occasions, he used the nuclear option, meaning he changed the rules or the interpretation of the rules by simple majority in order to balance 2 things. One was protect the minority's right to fully participate in the debate and keep the majority from running over the top of them. And the second is not allow the minority to paralyze the majority. Well, right now we're in that mode where we're in the paralysis of the majority. And so we need some more adjustments to take place.
Great, thank you. Changing directions a bit here, Kimberly Culbertson asks, does your position on environmental toxins in the environment include lead in the fuel of general aviation? airplanes, and helicopters? If so, what can we expect from the FAA in terms of the Hillsborough Airport, the sixth busiest general aviation airport in the United States, and how can we help?
So really interesting question, because it's one that I haven't been asked before and I don't know the answer to, except I can say it hasn't previously come up. So I have two folks on the line with me from my team who will follow up with you. And so let me introduce them. Carrie Henriks, and Carrie, you might just say hello to folks. And she is there you are.
Hi, everyone.
My field rep for Washington County, and Jake Okenberg, my business liaison. So let's get the details about the role of lead in aviation fuels, which I have never heard raised before. And I'll be very interested to learn more about it and the challenge it presents.
Well, I recognize that question was a little bit down in the weeds, but it's important to many of the residents in the Hillsborough area. So great, and thank you for giving us the support of your field team and everybody. They've always been great. So I'll look forward to getting some detail on that and sending it back to Kimberly, as well as posting it on our website.
Great.
So now I have another question for you. And this is reflecting back a bit on the last time that you were with us. We talked quite a bit about border issues and the immigrant struggle. That really was top of mind for you, and much appreciated top of mind. What are your thoughts about the current situation?
Yeah, so we have a dramatic change in philosophy in the executive branch, but we have an ongoing challenge. By dramatic change in philosophy, we have the difference between Trump's zero tolerance policy, which when you read the details, it amounted to let's inflict harm on children to discourage people from migrating or trying to immigrate to the United States. It was that speech which, when I read it, I couldn't believe what he was saying would actually be implemented. And it caused a member of my team to say, oh, well, Senator, there's one way to find out, go down to the border. I thought, well, that's right. And it was that Sunday I went down to the border and was the first member of Congress as a result to see the children being separated from their parents, and then to go up an hour up the road to a former Walmart where I had been told there were perhaps 1,000 boys, many of them who had been separated from their parents, stopped into that Walmart, that former Walmart. And they did not let me in the door. I thought maybe they would, but the resulting live Facebook post really raised the issue across America as to what was being hidden. So now you have an administration that wants to do right by every child, doesn't want to separate children, doesn't want to harm children, wants to give them a fair chance to make their asylum claim. But all of the facilities that went through so much atrophy during the Trump administration, it's been very hard to gear up to the level of children arriving. And that has created conditions that this administration is trying desperately to resolve, but still are a big challenge with overburdened facilities as try to move children into homes so that they can have be where they should be, in a home with a family, going to school while their asylum cases are adjudicated, and then try and get the asylum process back in gear, because it kind of fell apart through abuse and lack of use over the past few years. So a lot of work to be done. I was happy to see that Susan Rice, as domestic policy advisor, was playing a major role in it, that the president asked the vice president to really help on this area. So they're putting enormous attention into it, but we haven't gotten everything back to where it should be, and a lot of work to be done. And I might mention another piece of this is how we deal with Central America. I went down with Senator Tom Carper of Delaware to do a review of the program that then Vice President Biden had set up in Central America. And I was struck how the current level of essentially drug cartel influence on the government, on the military, on the police systems, on everyday life was a huge factor in driving people to desperation. You can imagine a simple vendor who's selling things out of a cart, who's told, pay us your weekly money, and if you don't pay us that protection money, it isn't that we bust up your cart. It's that either you die or we do horrific things to your family members. And when that permeates all the way down to the street level, you can imagine the enormous continuous stress for everyone, and that people just say, I've got to flee. And then you throw in poverty, you throw in the impacts of climate change. They've had both hurricanes and severe droughts affecting a lot of rural production. You really have a perfect storm, kind of a nightmare driving people north. So we have to figure out how to help dislodge the criminal enterprise, the drug cartels, and yet the drug cartels are so powerful in part because of the money that flows from selling drugs in the United States of America. So we are connected to them. We're also connected to them because their guns come from the United States of America. It's very easy to ship guns south from the United States. So that is another piece of the puzzle we need to do a lot more to address.
Thank you. I have another question from Jerry Mildner, and that is one of our biggest problems is children living in poverty. Senator Romney has proposed a bill to provide a universal benefit of $350 per month per child younger than the age of 5, and $250 per month for children between the ages of 6 and 17. What do you think of that bill and that concept?
Well, in general, I like it. The extension of the refundable child tax credit is essentially the parallel idea. And that is what we did implement in the American Recovery Plan under ARP. It was a major investment to do so. It's not cheap. That refundable child tax credit bill was $120 billion. Extending it costs a tremendous amount. But both concepts, was done through a refundable child tax credit or through a payment, are very parallel, and the numbers are quite similar.
Sorry, I'm like everybody else. I need to have an unmute button on my front of my head here. The pandemic has underscored the need for workforce development to prepare workers for new and different roles as the new normal for the economy comes into focus. What form of support from the federal government do you support?
And Pam, if I caught that right, did you say the pandemic has restructured the economy in terms of the types of skills workers need? Did I catch that right?
Yes, and therefore demands of the workforce development actions.
Well, we need to reinforce the role of community colleges and people able to go back and get retrained in new skills, and the sort of partnerships that exist. I know that when I was traveling throughout the state on my Made in Oregon manufacturing tours, I heard so much about welders. Well, that was the most common thing to come up. We need more welders. Well, welding is something that can be learned, but I think it's really helpful to have programs that go back into junior high and high school that we lost during No Child Left Behind, where the emphasis was on math and reading, and the sorts of classes that I took that included metal shop and wood shop and electronics shop when I was in junior high and high school. They give you kind of the joy of working with your hands, making things with your hands. We're lost. And we should help in partnership with the unions to strengthen apprenticeship programs. as well as another way to invest in the training of individuals for good paying jobs. So I introduced something called the Build Act years ago to reestablish high school programs. The term Build Act has now been used for multiple bills, so that's very confusing. But I really think that an infrastructure bill is the right place to also include a lot of support for skills training, because you can't rebuild America if people don't have the skills to be able to get the work done.
Very true. There's no question about that. I have a question here from Tom Markgraf at TriMet. Thanks to you and your staff for help with zero emissions vehicles. Do you see support for this transition in the President's infrastructure plan?
Yes, very much in his plan, there is support for it. It's going to be a tough slog through the Senate because we're caught in the grip of the struggle between the fossil fuel world, which wants to try to stop us from moving to renewable energy, and the renewable energy world and the environmental world that says, you know, this climate change, this climate chaos is the most serious threat facing humankind. I've been spending some time just kind of looking at the history of our planet. There's a book out called The Fossil Men that's about the evolution of essentially the human line separate from the other great apes, and how that takes place over 5 to 7 million years. But what we're talking about when we're talking about humans' impact on the planet, we're talking about the last 150 years. Through tapping into fossil fuels, we've been able to use millions and millions of years of stored energy to reshape the planet overnight. And it turns out there's a downside to that. And that downside we see in Oregon. We see it over on the coast, where the ocean is 30% more acidic than before we started burning fossil fuels 150 years ago. And just 150 years ago is a flash in the pan. It's just nothing in the context of time and this planet. Just to give you a little bit of sense of the kind of the history here. A lot of times when we're talking about like Tyrannosaurus Rex, we're talking 150 million years ago. So the 150 years is nothing. And yet we've changed the ocean so much that our oysters have a hard time reproducing and starting to build their shell in the more acidic water. So we have to artificially buffer that water. We have seen that warmer, more acidic water facilitate a disease among the starfish over on the coast, which is resulting in the devastation of our kelp forests, which have a very important role in the ocean chain. We've seen it in the longer, hotter fire season. We've seen it in the more intense outbreak of pine beetles. We've seen it in the current drought affecting many parts of our state. Right now, for the first time in 105 years, the Klamath Basin isn't going to have a single drop for irrigators, for farmers or ranchers to irrigate crops. And there's not even going to be enough for a decent flow in the Klamath River. So we're going to see another calamity for the salmon coming up the Klamath River. And the lack of salmon production is going to affect our fisheries down the line. The lack of snow is going to affect our winter sports and so forth. So we see it just in Oregon. And we absolutely have to pursue the electrification of our economy with the electricity being generated by renewable energy. I've taken and done the back of the envelope math for how much solar and how much wind it takes, along with hydropower, along with a modest contribution from other sources. We can move to a completely renewable energy electrified economy. And now the cost of a kilowatt hour of electricity, renewable wind or solar, is basically the same cost as gas, natural gas, before you take into account the deeply damaging impacts of the natural gas system because of its leakage of methane, a major global warming gas. So we have to drive that transition. There's a lot in there for vehicles, for federal fleets transitioning, for charging stations. but then we also have to be generating that electricity and then doing far more systems to be able to store energy to balance out the supply and demand.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Would you tell me the name of the book again? I didn't hear the name.
Yes, it's called Fossil Men.
Fossil Men. Okay, thank you. I think we have time for one more question, and this is from the mayor of West Lynn, Jules Walters. First of all, Jules says, thank you for being here today, Senator. Many people have used the moratorium on mortgage payments due to COVID-19. Are there any plans for refinancing as the economy recovers? Specifically, has there been any discussion on programs like HAMP or HARP, HARP, being brought back to help people keep their homes? Thank you.
So I'm terrified for folks who have taken advantage of forbearance, and we really have to have a major push to have mortgage companies put those payments essentially onto the back end of the mortgage. Because if they call for, somebody's done forbearance for 3 or 4 months while they've been struggling, or perhaps longer, and they have to make all those payments right away, they will be foreclosed on. And that foreclosure is certainly legal for the mortgage company, but it doesn't serve America well in terms of the success of families, the stability of families, home ownership being the major driver of middle-class wealth in our country. We should be doing a lot more to enable people to be home buyers, not overseeing another calamity that drives many people out of home ownership and forces them to start from scratch. So there hasn't been much discussion of a HARP style program, but I understand the administration's immersed in conversations over mortgage companies essentially doing internal rewrites to put the payments on the back end of the loan. I'm glad you raised the question, though, because it makes me want to check into with a little more detail what the administration is doing in this area. It's really an important area.
And thank you for that. When you find out more information, I'm sure your staff will get back to us about what your discovery has been. So,
I'll have Jacob on the list to make sure we can get it back to you, and you can post what we learned.
Okay, can we squeeze one more quick question in here? I don't know if it's quick or
yes,
not.
You
Okay.
can.
Okay, good. Thank you. This question comes from Katie Riley, and she asks, we know that for the economy to truly get back on track, women need to go back to work. So there needs to be assistance for childcare, not only for infants and preschoolers, but also for the after school and summer programs. How extensive is the child care assistance proposed in the infrastructure bill, and where is the bill in negotiations?
So the negotiation is being driven by President Biden, and one of the things that Republicans have said in those negotiations is they will not support any form of extension beyond what they call traditional infrastructure. Which means that you can probably shoehorn electric lines, transmission lines, and rural broadband into it, but it's going to be really hard to get electric charging stations, and certainly won't be able to get childcare into it. Childcare would be part then of the American Family Plan, but again, that is policy changes that would require 60 votes unless we go through reconciliation. And with each succeeding bill, it'll get harder and harder. We had in the recovery plan $25 billion for child care providers to assist them, as well as the child tax credit. The $120 billion for the refundable child tax credit will help people hire. So both helping from the demand side and the supply side to increase child care. We have seen a massive impact on women going back into employment. Largely or significantly as a result of the role of many women being primary caretakers in the middle of this chaos where schools do not have their regular rhythm, and it's very, very hard to go back into the workforce until schools have a regular rhythm. And plus the types of the jobs that did not recover quickly tended to be jobs dominated by women. So childcare is a huge part of the discussion about how we kind of restore the foundation for families to thrive. We did some pretty significant work in the ARP, but if that's not extended, it will be not provide that foundation into the future. So we're going to work hard to get it extended, but it is not a slam dunk. We do not have 60 votes, a strong bipartisan coalition to take on childcare. So I'm really hoping we can get it done. I'm hoping that the understanding and seeing what's going on with the ARP side will say, okay, this actually makes a lot of sense, and has a lot of people weighing in with colleagues on both sides of the aisle and say, keep going on this. This affects, takes so many children out of poverty and enables so many individuals to return to the workforce while they're balancing their child rearing responsibilities.
Thank you so much, Senator. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for all the work that you're doing. And again, thank you for having a great staff. We appreciate everything. So, and you're always welcome to come back anytime. So we'll work on the next time we have the chance to talk with you and ask questions.
Thank you. I look forward to it. Thanks so much, Pam, for inviting me. And thank you, everybody. This is such a great forum. So many people participating from so many different roles and perspectives in the community. So I look forward to connecting with you all down the road.
Great. So I have a few announcements to make, and quickly, I want to thank our sponsors again. As you see who our presenting sponsor and our forum series sponsors are, IBW 48 and Legacy Health. I also want to call your attention to our upcoming events. We have a series of events that are on tap. The other thing I want to announce is many of you know I'm retiring from Westside Economic Alliance, and we have a very active search committee that is working hard to identify candidates for this role. So if you have information, if you're interested yourself, please let us know. You can send emails to Casey, Teresa, or myself, and you can also email Brantley Detmer, our president, who is leading that search. So again, big thanks to the senator and your staff, and a reminder that we have another forum this week on Thursday. So we'll look forward to seeing you again then. Thank you again to everybody. Have a great day.